This presentation was made by Peter Viles in the Loring Auditorium on June 6, 2023.
Worcester and its people have figured prominently in America's various wars. Prior to the Revolution, it was a storehouse for Patriot arms and ammunition. Thomas Gage, the royal governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony, sent 2 men to Worcester to spy out the situation. They were quickly recognized for who they were by their dress and accent. They reported back, so the Worcester accent appears to be rather unique. They reported back to Gage, but advised him that Worcester Patriots were in strong numbers. It was also too far for a body of troops to march out, confiscate and destroy the munitions, and return to Boston in one day. One can argue, as Ray Raphael has in his book, Before Lexington and Concord, that the revolution did not begin in Lexington and Concord in 1775, but at Worcester a year earlier. Under the Massachusetts Governance Act of 1774, one of the intolerable acts, which basically did away with the 1691 charter, which had given the towns the authority to elect or appoint local officials. County judges were now appointed by the royal government. On September 6, 1774, over 4,600 militiamen from Worcester and 36 surrounding towns gathered in Worcester and marched to the courthouse at Lincoln Square, where they dragged the judges out of their chambers, stripped them of their robes, and made them recant their oaths to the king. They then lined both sides of Main Street and marched the now discredited judges down to the Common, stopping 30 times along the way and forcing the judges to repeat their recantations. By driving the officials out of town, they effectively ended the British government in the county. The only reason violence did not occur was that militia had been disarmed as they crossed the town line into Worcester. A prominent Worcester patriot and soldier was Timothy Bigelow, a blacksmith whose monument on the Common is shown here. This was erected in 1861 by his nephew. Bigelow was sent as a delegate to the Massachusetts Provincial Congress. The town gave Bigelow strict instructions. Quote, "If all infractions of our rights by the right acts of the British Parliament be redressed and we restored to the full enjoyment of all our privileges, you are to consider the people of this province as absolved on their part from the obligations of the 1691 charter and to all intents and purposes reduced to a state of nature." It was October 1774 and Worcester was effectively declaring its independence. Chosen colonel of the 15th Massachusetts Colonial Militia, Bigelow led 58 troops to Lexington and Concord 6 months later, just as he was followed later by 30 more followers. Just as an aside, bragging rights, a 5 times great uncle of mine was on the green at Lexington. And I know that because he and 17 others signed a deposition which was to prove that the British had fired first. And no one would sign a legal deposition unless they were there as an actual witness. Bigelow volunteered for Benedict Arnold's ill-fated mission to invade Canada during the fall of 1775. After a long and dangerous trek across Maine, the expedition ended with a failed attempt to take Quebec. Bigelow was among those captured and held as a prisoner of war for months. By the fall of 1776, Bigelow was free again. He went back to fighting for the Patriot cause. He later fought at Saratoga and suffered through the winter at Valley Forge. Tradition has it that he fought more like a tiger than like a man. He was later present at the Battle of Yorktown. After the war, one family historian reports that Bigelow was left with a frame physically impaired by long hardship, toil, and exposure, with blighting worldly prospects, with The remains of private property, considerable at the outset, seriously diminished by the many sacrifices of his martial career. He could not build his blacksmithing business back to what it had been. The circumstances of his death are a little confusing. Although he had been given quite a bit of land in Vermont in return for his military service, including that which is now Montpelier, he apparently died in Devitt's prison in March of 1790. Isaiah Thomas, a newspaper printer and publisher of the Massachusetts Spy, a rebel newspaper in Boston, moved his presses by night to Worcester 3 days before Lexington and Concord to avoid confiscation by the royal authorities. He resumed printing the Spy in Worcester, where he soon printed an account of the battles of Lexington and Concord. Hearing that a messenger was bringing a copy of the Declaration of Independence to Boston, he intercepted the rider and made the first public reading of the Declaration of Independence from the balcony of the Worcester Town Hall. In 1812, he founded the American Antiquarian Society, the third such one in the country and the first to have a national scope. Its present building, with a recent addition, stands at the corner of Park Avenue and Salisbury Street. Mainly a research library, its mission is to collect and archive a copy of all printed records in the United States from the first European settlement through 1876. It's basically purely research oriented, and it's not something you just go in and browse through the stacks. Henry Knox, a librarian by trade, was commissioned by George Washington as his artillery commander and charged him with the task of bringing the cannon captured at Fort Ticonderoga to Boston. He passed through Worcester with his train of cannon, dragged over the Berkshires in dead winter of 1775-76. Mounted on Dorchester Heights overlooking Boston, it prompted the evacuation of Boston by the British that spring. This plaque sits at the site of the old Worcester courthouses in Lincoln Square. You may wonder why we celebrate March 17th as Evacuation Day. Well, this is what was who evacuated? The British evacuated Boston. One could also claim that the Irish politicians were looking at a way of commemorating St. Patrick's Day, but knew they couldn't get that through the legislature, so they found something else to acknowledge.
Like the Irish.
There was also a strong Tory contingent in Worcester, Timothy Payne being a prominent one. His house, the Oaks, this is John Chandler. The Chandlers, the Paynes, and the Putnams were the powers in Worcester. They intermarried like you wouldn't believe. It's almost like my own grandpa. This is the Main Street gauntlet that they marched it down. The courthouse up at the top. Timothy Bigelow's house was right across the street, and while they were debating what to do, they met in Timothy Bigelow's house. They also met at the various taverns along the way, and so they marched them about a half a mile down Main Street, stopping many times. Timothy Payne's house, the Oaks. One story, perhaps apocryphal, was that John Adams, our second president, as a young teacher in Worcester, was having dinner with the Paynes and their fellow Tories, the Chandlers and the Putnams. As was the custom, Timothy Payne stood and proposed a toast to the king. All men rose and drank to the monarch. Adams then stood and proposed a second toast to the devil. All gasped as there were ladies present. Mrs. Payne, nee Sarah Chandler, another prominent Worcester Tory family, returned to her husband and said, "Now, dear, he's drunk to our king, we should drink to his." Ironically, the Oaks, which stands on lower Lincoln Street, is now the headquarters of the Timothy Bigelow chapter of the DAR. Worcester has always been a hotbed for abolition. The Mechanics' Society, formed in 1842, had abolition as one of its key issues. Worcester leaders included included Eli Thayer. I think I have a picture of Eli here. There's Eli. He advocated for the admission of Kansas as a free state and formed the Massachusetts Immigrant Aid Society to send anti-slavery settlers to Kansas. He is remembered in Worcester as also being the founder of the Oriad Institute. The Oriad Institute is now demolished, but it was a very impressive looking building at the time. A second early Worcester abolitionist resident was Abby Kelly Foster. Although she had traveled a lot, particularly Ohio, she and her husband Stephen made their home in the Technic area in western Worcester. She is remembered now as in Abby Keller Foster's house, a shelter and residence for homeless and abused women and their children. The first shelter was at 2123 Crown Street. The current residents, they still run that as an overnight shelter. They now have a much bigger area residence on High Street downtown, which has year-round quarters for women and children, homeless and abused women. This is Annette Rafferty, who started Abby's house, making smooth the path. There are several Civil War monuments, the largest one being on the Common. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, state governors mobilized their various militia units, equivalent to today's National Guard, appointed colonels, and formed regiments. The Worcester militia had been led by George Hull Ward. There's George in his uniform, colonel, headed by George Hull Ward, but Charles Devens, who was more politically connected, was named colonel of the Massachusetts 15th Volunteer Infantry Regiment. This is the offshoot or the child of the original militia that Timothy Bigelow took to Lexington and conquered. His friends told Ward that he had been insulted by Devens' appointment and he should decline the post of lieutenant governor. Ward refused, saying, "The ward is bigger than me, and I will do my duty as called." At one point in one of his letters, he called it, he's engaged in a holy cause. The 15th was in most of the major battles in the Eastern Theater, from Ball's Bluff, a minor skirmish by later standards, and a military fiasco from start to finish, through Antietam. There's the Massachusetts Monument at Antietam. 606 men went in, and 276 came out unscathed, a 54% casualty rate, one of the highest casualty rates of any regiment in any Civil War battle. It also saw combat at Gettysburg and Spotsylvania. By that time, the regiment was reduced to less than 80 men. Regiments became the divisions became the size of regiments, regiments became the size of companies, companies became the size of platoons. They maintained their identity throughout all of that. George Hull Ward was seriously wounded at Ball's Bluff. He lost his right leg below the knee, but returned to the regiment after Antietam and was killed at Gettysburg. He's buried at Rural Cemetery on Grove Street, so-called Rural Cemetery because it was so far out from the middle center of town. You know where it is, it's just north of the North Works. So here's his statue, here's the 15th statue. This is a statue to George himself at Gettysburg. He's one of the very few individuals who has a statue. His wife left his wife and two small children at home. He wrote a series of letters back and forth. There's a series of letters back and forth between the two in the Worcester Historical Museum. The fact that his letters to her survived isn't too surprising, but because he was the colonel, he was able to keep her letters as well. There's a letter about every 3 days. I've been privileged to transcribe them and annotate them as to what are the references? Emily says at one point, I went down street, that means, or up street, that means downtown. I went up street and saw Mrs. Smith. She asked about you. Well, who was Mrs. Smith? Well, I was able to identify her. A lot of time looking through newspapers and census records and city directories, but you can find Mrs. Smith. As I say, it's a conversation back and forth between lasting a little over a year and a half. There's George's monument at Rural Cemetery. The bust on the top of the monument went missing some years ago, and so if you see it on the Briar Rose table, please tell them your family. I'd very much like to have it back. After the war, Devon's close friend George Frisbee Hoare, a Worcester lawyer and U.S. Senator, proposed a statue of Devon's and solicited donations from the veterans of the 15th. Devon's was universally disliked by the men. Among other things, they felt he had led them into a trap at False Bluff, and very few subscribed to Hoare's request. It was not until the inscription on the base of the statue was changed to include the phrase, "and the men of Worcester County," that enough money was raised for the monument. It now stands in Lincoln Square by the third courthouse, which is now, of course, luxury apartments. Another marker of Worcester's contribution to the Civil War is that of the Bull Mansion on Pearl Street. It was given as a wedding present to Sarah Wesson by her father, Daniel Wesson, a gunmaker in Springfield, on her marriage to Dr. George Bull, a dentist, in 1876. Upkeep was high, and both the house and the bride proved unsatisfactory to the good doctor, so he left for Denver, never to return to Worcester. No tenants could be found for the house, and there were several owners between 1889 and 1913. In that year, it was sold to George H. Ward, GAR, post number 10, for $21,600. Its original cost, almost 30 years earlier, was $125,000. So it was sold for less than 10%, not counting for inflation. An addition was made behind the main building to house a meeting hall, whose walls were covered with plaques with the name of all the Civil War veterans from Worcester County. I've been in that hall, it's full of ghosts. That's the only way I can describe it. Over 2,000 names.
Wow.
At one point, Worcester Ward post number 10 had the largest membership of any in the country. As the veterans died off, however, membership dwindled, and the building was deeded to the city in 1932. In recent years, it's been the site of several restaurants, none of which have been able to succeed. It's now available for private events. They don't allow cameras in the meeting room, so I was not able to get any pictures of that, but the inscription above the door says GAR post number 10. Lovely building. Other wars. Worcester men were a little involved in the War of 1812. It was mainly fought over issues related to maritime trade with England and was generally unpopular in New England. Similarly, the Mexican-American War, 1846, did not really concern Worcesterites, being mainly fought over the southwestern border with Mexico. 3 companies of the 2nd Massachusetts Infantry Division were engaged in the 1898 Spanish-American War, and their plaques adorn the outside walls of City Hall. A statue is also noted in Wheaton Square at Lincoln and Salisbury Streets. Those of you who get the T&G, the then and now picture from a week ago was of this statue. Worcester's involvement in World War II is marked by both the Memorial Auditorium. This is the odd. Lincoln Square and a low semicircular work Lincoln Square naming major battles in France. The yard is now abandoned and awaiting acceptable plan for renovation. The Second World War is marked by a large plaque or tower in Newton Square and a statue of John Vincent Power, a Marine first lieutenant who won he was killed in 1944 in Kwajalein Atoll and awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for action above the call of duty. Korean and Vietnam War memorials also exist. This is one for the 191 Worcesterites who died in Korea on Washington Square by the rail station, and for all the Vietnamese members, including the 1,536 men and women from Worcester who died. These are on Green Hill Park. Animal lovers will appreciate there's also a memorial for over the 1,000 service dogs who saw duty in Nam. And finally, the Desert Wars of 1990 are also memorialized at Green Hill Park. Call it what you will, patriotism or what you want, is in Worcester. Strange sights and wonderful sights. Strange sights. The Bancroft Tower. It was built in 1900 by Stephen Salisbury III in honor of Worcester native George Bancroft, diplomat and former Secretary of the Navy, and a boyhood friend of Stephen Salisbury II. It's now part of the Worcester Parks Department. It's closed to the public, but opened every Halloween for visits from the neighborhood children. When she died in 1918, Ellen Rogers Kennedy, whose life of philanthropy was a prominent part, willed $75,000, equivalent to about $1.4 million today, for a monument emblematic of some event connected with the history of Massachusetts as a colony. It was carved and cast in Italy. The sculpture and massive base were shipped across the Atlantic, erected in Worcester at the edge of Elm Park on the corner of Park Avenue and Highland Street, and dedicated in 1927. It's topped by a 12-foot bronze figure of a man and woman, their hands guiding a plow, perhaps more emblematic of the settlement of the Plain States than Massachusetts, with a base collection of 16 carved panels, each depicting everyday activities of colonists: farming, weaving, home building. Unfortunately, the base was made of soft limestone, which could not stand up to New England winters. Several attempts at restoration were made, most of which made matters worse. The figures of the man and the woman sowing seeds were removed and stored in a hangar at Worcester Airport. The base was enclosed in plywood box for a number of years, with many wondering just what was inside. A suitable restoration was finally accomplished, and the rededication occurred in 2007. Here's the National Guard Museum, also in Wheaton Square. It's lost its top tower, as you can see, over the years. For a while, it was the National Guard Armory and Museum. That's moved out a few years ago. Very typical Romanesque architecture of the day. Here's the Oriad Institute as it was and as it is today. Here's Worcester State Hospital. And the clock tower, the main building burned, but the clock tower was rebuilt, standing alone. It's probably going to fall over someday. It looks like it's caught in a high wind, it would topple, but there it is. I could see it from my office at UMass every day. Here's the Higgins Armory and Museum. If you go down in Greendale area, if you go down that hill, you'll see this. It was built by Milton Higgins' son to house his armory collection. The collection is now moved to the Worcester Art Museum, and this is available for wedding receptions and the like. This is the type of building, glass and steel encased, that put the Norcross Brothers out of business. Professional bicycle racing was a popular sport in the late 1800s. One of the best competitors was Major Taylor, an African American who turned pro in 1896 at the age of 18 and moved to Worcester. At the 1899 World Championships in Montreal, Taylor won the 1 mile sprint, become the first African American to win a world championship. At one point, he held the world record for events ranging from a 1/4 mile to 2 miles. His record for 1 mile from the standing start stood for 28 years. This is a bas-relief sculpture at the front of the main building of the Worcester Public Library downtown. Elm Park represents another landmark event in Worcester. Its 27-acre plot, half donated by John Hammond, a prosperous farmer living nearby, and half by Levi Lincoln, a prominent Worcester lawyer and politician, was sold to the city in 1854 as the new common. The people of Worcester were not happy with the purchase, as many thought the price, $11,257, was too high for a swamp on the outskirts of the village, and that most of the population would not use it. Too far from the center of town. It represents the second municipal purchase of land to be used as a public park and predates New York's Central Park. The land remained undeveloped for some years. As the new common, it was used as a pasture and a dump. Land to the east, Newton Hill, named for Rejoice Newton, had a lumber mill in the area some years later, added 61 acres. Taking land for other uses, especially Doherty High School, over the years has reduced its size to now 58 acres. The marshes were drained into 2 ponds and landscaping done by the Olmsted brothers. Its iconic bridges over the ponds are a popular site for wedding photos. That's looking across by, that's the fire alarm building in the background. All the fire alarms came into this building, and then they were dispensed out. The engines were then sent out with the horses, no doubt. Baseball's first perfect game was pitched here in Worcester. Were you a sports fan? This is off of Seaver Street on the old agricultural fairgrounds. There's no question that in post-Depression years, Worcester stagnated and was perhaps the tired old mill town the Boston newspapers described. The construction of I-290 in early 1960s didn't help, as it divided Worcester in half. One observer called it a Chinese wall through the heart of the city, and destroyed the homes of its poorest citizens, those of African American descent. The authorities also assured concerned residents there would be no through truck traffic, the highway merely serving as a quick way to get from north to south in Worcester. Tornado. Anybody here when the tornado, not here in Briarwood, obviously, you remember the tornado? Some of you remember the tornado? Localized to northern Worcester, the tornado of 1953 was a traumatic event still remembered. Starting in Petersham to the northwest at 4:25 in the afternoon of June 9th, it became a Fukushima Class 4 tornado with winds up to 250 miles an hour. It traveled at about 35 miles an hour, 45 miles southeast, cutting a path a mile wide across Worcester. So there we start. It ended down in Hubbardston somewhere. Probably in Hopkinton. 94 persons died and destruction was widespread. This is this path through Worcester. Just for reference, Briarwood would be somewhere, of course Briarwood wasn't there, but the area of Briar would be somewhere in this area here. It traveled across the summit of East Mountain Street and across Northwest near the summit, traveled across Quinsigamond College, then the campus of Assumptions College, and eventually leveled all the houses on Ucatena Street, just off of Clark Street. There's Assumption College. As you can see, the big building on the left looks fairly intact, whereas the destruction just beyond that, or to the south of that, is extensive. It's now rebuilt and is now Quinsigamond Community College. They rebuilt Assumption College out Salisbury Street. There's Ucatena Avenue. All those houses built on slabs. These are just the concrete slabs that are left. It was estimated that at least 10,000 people in Worcester lost their homes. Some would put it as high as 15,000 rendered homeless. So here's some more pictures of the hurricane. The tornado. My mother went through the hurricane of '38, and it changed her life entirely. She was scared of everything ever after. And 84 minutes, 94 lives. Not quite sure where this plaque is. In Worcester somewhere. By 1970, Worcester claimed home to 6 colleges and universities: Worcester State, Assumption, Clark, Holy Cross, Quinsigamond Community, and Worcester Polytech. Worcester Polytech we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago, founded by John Boynton and Ichabod Washburn, requirement that students had to learn both theory and practice of engineering. The arrival of the University of Massachusetts Medical School is the 7th college, as one marker of Worcester's renaissance in the latter half of the 20th century. The concept of an idea of state medical school probably arose in the late 1960s. It was the feeling of many legislatures that the 3 medical schools, Harvard, Tufts, and Boston University, were not interested in educating physicians to serve in Massachusetts. Therefore, a state medical school was proposed and appropriately established with the emphasis on family practice. Having decided to have a state medical school, it was clear it was not going to be located in Boston. There was a long and, I understand, bitter debate about location. Many wanted it in Amherst, site of the parent university. Others thought it should be in a larger population area as far from Boston as possible, that is Springfield. And finally, by a margin of 1 vote, Worcester was selected as the site. As might be expected, state funding was extremely political in nature. Those in Boston never wanted a state school. Those in the western part of the state never wanted it in Worcester. And a third group didn't think the Commonwealth ought to be in the medical business at all. For several years, the state contribution to UMass's welfare was a crapshoot, and whether it would be funded in the Commonwealth's yearly budget or not. It was often the case where 1/12th budget amount based on the prior year's figures had to be voted each month before the annual budget was enacted. When I came to Worcester to work at the medical school, it had just opened, and I can remember we were never sure we were going to get paid. We always did, but it was always a crapshoot. From these humble beginnings, 34 students in the first class of 1974 and 14 beds in the new hospital opened 2 years later. It now has a class of 162 each year, and its medical health system consists of 5 hospitals in 4 cities and 1,130 patient beds and another outpatient service at Hotman Hospital. Having absorbed all the hospitals in the area except for St. Vincent's into its system, UMass has become a major force in the Central Mass and indeed United States and worldwide health scene. There it is today. They're still building there, by the way. I understand. Haven't been by for a while. This is where I lived for 21 years. I visited home occasionally. And here it is today, looking across Lake Quinsigamond. My office was on the back side, overlooking the state hospitals up the hill on the back side of that. So biotech is the new industry. Replacing wire making and textiles and the like, what we talked about last time. So to sum it all up, 3 weeks ago, I began in 1668 with David Buchan's assessment of the ability of 60 families to survive on the western shore of Quinsigamond Pond. We know the difficulties involved with native raids and destructions until 1713. King Philip's War, and finally Jonas Rice. Came growth over the next 35 years. Worcester became the shire town in 1721 and a city in 1848. Its early growth was marked by William Merrifield and William Crompton. It's now the heart of the Commonwealth. Here's Merrifield. We've seen this before. You've seen this before. And here's the early Crompton loom in his grave marker. Washburn and bone, wire, steel, barbed wire. Gordon and Knight, the takeoff, making leather belts, not to put around your waist, but to connect your machine to the power pulleys above. The Royal Worcester Corset Factory. And so thanks for coming. I've just begun to touch on Worcester's rich history and its contribution to New England, the United States, and the world. More information on its people and industries can be found on the internet, the Worcester Public Library downtown, the Worcester Historical Museum, or Preservation Worcester. Be glad you're here, not just at Briarwood, but in an area so rich in American history. Thank you. Thank you.
The Briarwood Broadcasting Committee is an activity supported by your annual dues to the Briarwood Residents Association. We thank you very much for your support.